So what we did is we talked to RAN. They had a global finance campaign, and they had identified the Bank of America forest policies. We realized this project was in the test phase. It was very early. It was very initial. They had just gotten their licenses, and they didn't have a lot of funding. That's not like how it is in the Horn River, where my father's people are from. We're facing a much different adversary, but the lessons that can be derived from this are the same. And Ben talked a lot about the problems. I'm kind of a solution-based type person, with all due respect. I think there's options here to engage with them. I'm going to ask for you guys' help in the end. So what we did is did a bit of corporate research. We found that the Bank of America was indirectly financing the operator. So we went to Global Forest Watch and got them to create us a map. And then we found that, okay, the operators are a critical juncture in the project. Let's engage. Let's try and change this. Let's try and, at minimum, minimize the damage, and at maximum shut them down, because this territory that they're trying to develop, while somewhat developed with private landholders, those kinds of things, the way industrial development works in our territory, it's been going on since, the fur trade. The treaty in 1899 was signed as a consequence of the Klondike Gold Rush, and Klondikers coming through our territory, and the potential for war, like the Chilcotin War you had in the center of BC happening there. So the Northwest Mounted Police and the government at the time said, well, let's not do that, let's sign a treaty. We think that this dynamic, this sort of industrial dynamic, has been going on consistently since then. It started with furs, trees, coal, oil and gas, and water now, and something else we team. So, Bank of America, they've got this interesting corporate policy. There's something like this in the Boreal. This, we thought, was a leverage point. And this, is arguable. We're treaty people, but we felt that the indigenous land claims hadn't been settled insofar as the treaty hadn't been lived up to, how that works. So we took a look at some of the things they had said. This is HHG, I forget which document this was, a corporate document that came out of them, and they were saying things like, we may not have sufficient working capital, decreases in liquidity, project delay, Aboriginal land claims. And these are the kinds of things that I realized early on were useful, even if I couldn't leverage them legally. These are ways for me to actually engage with an industry worth so much more than my people. Not to commodify my people, but from a strategic sense, I'm compelled to engage in that way. We had to choose where you're going to put the dollars, the heartbeats, the energy to work with this, to try and change this. My community identified that coal bed methane is unacceptable for a lot of the issues that Ben spoke to with fracking, which is why I offer it today. So, we failed. In the end, we didn't get a stoppage. We did a number of things, and there's a number of delays in the community, and all of our leverage points evaporated and the project proceeded. But there's a lesson, and I'll get to that in a minute. What this slide is about is legal opportunities I see that I think we could leverage as a group. This little thing here, this is just scary as scary can be. This is a piece of a psychological assessment tool created, I think, in the late 90s to study the Rio Pueblo Yaqui in northern Mexico. These kids here, this is sort of representative drawings for kids aged 4 to 5 who were sprayed with organophosphates. This is where your asparagus might come from, things like that. These are kids, same indigenous group, same bloodline, same families, but 30 miles away. And the reason I show this is to refer to this work, which is something I'm doing on the side. These are representative drawings for 5-year-olds. And what you see is children who are developmentally delayed across the board. Now, I offer this, I'm kind of skipping ahead, but I think there's a way to leverage the Public Health Act to engage with these kinds of dynamics, because I suspect that this is what's happening in my territory. Now, in this case, this was the first Aboriginal class action. It's not a title case. You can't leverage my rights as an Aboriginal person or a treaty person, but what you can do as a group, and you could do it if you were part of West Moberly and Saulteau and Halfway and Fort Nelson, where I am from, you could say that, well, let's hold the province accountable for damages and the decrease in water, for example. No one's ever done this. It's something I'd like to try. Alternatively, and this is my mother's first name, my mother's people, and my grandmother's people, which you'll see in a second. You saw that there's a coal mine that went up. I'm not sure many of you are familiar with the law, but a coal mine went up and erased a small herd of caribou, in essence. It was the last sort of high country in that territory where they could go in winter. And they winter in the high country to avoid wolves. They've been on the decline in part because of the W.C. Bennett Dam, which erased their traditional calving grounds, their ability to travel from one calving ground to their wintering grounds and summering grounds. And so the Crown basically tried to run roughshod over our rights. And my mother's people, my former employers, and my family said no. And they took it to court and they won. It's been appealed. The appeal judgment has been reserved, which is a scary sign. We're probably going to go to the Supreme Court on this thing. But my point is only that there are legal actions, very new, very recent. This was certified in January of this year. This went to the Court of Appeal last month. There are ways to engage with this. That's not just about my rights and how you impact me. It's about subtlety in that debate. So, what's the power of culture and the law? This is my grandmother's affidavit, and I'm going to actually read it. It says that, according to West Moberly Elder Catherine Dokie, the ability to hunt caribou has interrupted the generational transmission of traditional ecological knowledge. She says, now that there are not enough caribou to hunt, it is difficult for me to pass on our special knowledge to the young ones in our community. This special knowledge is about to be lost. How can I teach them to use caribou bones if there are no caribou to hunt? How will they learn to use caribou hides if they can't get them? That's me at 10 years old with my first duck. And the reason I put this here, aside from being a hilarious picture, is that this is how I was raised, and this special knowledge is being lost in multiple places. The other point, though, is that this affidavit and a number of other pieces of evidence that she put forward were instrumental in winning the case. My point is simply that culture has a substantial possibility in law that I'd like to use. I think this it has so much. Here's the interesting part. It's something we're going to explore in the film we're working on. But one of the things you'll be protecting if you work with me to engage with fracking and those kinds of things is something like this. This is a dream map from Prophet River, which is between where my mother and my father's people are from. This is very old. It's probably 30 years old this picture was taken. This is how the dreamers in my community would have mapped out a coming year's harvesting. This is old stuff. These systems of belief and cognition and perspective don't exist a lot, and in part is because of the resource development we have in my territory. And I share this with you in the hopes that you understand that the way I'm approaching this and the way I'm trying to engage with this industry speaks not only to the law, but also to the reason I'm in the law. And I guess I can't really convey how important these things are to me except to say that they have profound significance to my people, and they used to decide how we would go on our seasonal round and find animals. And the dreamers in our territory, and this is an interesting point, spoke of a time when the water would be taken away from us, when the water would leave our territory. They spoke of a time when people would create giant holes in the ground. And these are old prophecies that, again, I share with you, not that they're trying to compel you to do something and work with me, but our territory has been like this for a long time. These impacting things, they were foresaw in my grandfather's time and the people before my grandfathers. So, this is an opportunity, to my mind, with all that said. I think, and this is something I was doing with the Canadian Environmental Network, and I'd like to continue doing, I think that environmental nonprofits, progressive think tanks, First Nations, and potentially you, and whatever role you have in this room in your life, we can work together to compel government to engage with industry appropriately. I think there's a number of benefits, and this is one I kind of like to speak to, and these are fairly obvious. The environmental justice point I'd like to expand upon with some public health work I'm doing, but I'll answer questions about that maybe later. But this is kind of a key point for me. The stuff that Ben is referring to, the 13 points he identified, to my mind, are bigger than just issues about BC. They're the degree to which we solve the inequitable resource extraction in my territory, the tools we create as a society, you here in the south, my people up in the north, industry, government, and everybody else who has a potential stake in that process. Those are tools that speak to how we extract resources from the land. They speak to how we relate to each other. And I think water, as that one connecting thing that connects us all, is a really good example of how we might create better tools to be more equitable. Why should my territory have so much on it? Why should you be unaware of what happens where I'm from? Why should I have 200-foot flames flying out of wellheads that are poorly constructed? Why should that occur? And if we can address that, if we can answer that as a culture, as a society in BC, as a regulator, us with our creativity, I think we have tools that could answer some other big questions that we face as a species. And I guess that's where I'd like to end it. I think that there is hope here, despite the massive issues that's been identified, and despite some of the issues that I referred to. I think that because of the law around people like me, because of the law around resource development, because of the changes in our popular consciousness, there's a real opportunity for change. And I just identified a few points. Fracking is technological innovation allowing for resource extraction, and that's happened before. It's happened in our culture, in our territory for a long, long time. We used to do it with the changes in technology. The colonizer did it as well, and the only issue is that the destructive potential of the colonizer was so massive that now our territory can no longer handle what we're facing. The work that I used to do would cut across silos, and I think that's a good way to approach this. Again, those of you in this room who have any legal experience, who have academic experience, who have direct action experience, whatever you do, you can be a part of this change. And again, the change isn't just about protecting something or protecting something far away, it's about building tools for the future, and I think that's a really hopeful message. And I think, I'll just end with this. There's an opportunity. We talk about dialogue, we talk about improving policy options and all these things. I think people like you in this room allow for that. I didn't speak too much about fracking in particular in my territory. I think Ben did that very eloquently. But I wanted to speak to tonight why and how we might engage with it. And this is the work that myself and Fiona and Damien are doing. This is the work I do in my law career. But I think it's work that you can all be a part of. So with that, I'd like to ask you guys for questions.